On a freezing Boston night, Billionaire, Liam Carter kicked a soggy cardboard box in anger, but instead of trash, he heard a whimper. Inside was a half-frozen 6-year-old boy. That single moment would unravel his entire life and lead to a choice that changed everything. The city of Boston was wrapped in an unforgiving December chill, the kind of night when even the street lamps seemed to shiver, and the air felt like shards of glass against the skin. Liam Carter, a 30-year-old tech mogul whose fortune was splashed across every financial magazine in the country, stormed out of the gleaming glass tower that bore his company's name. He didn't even notice the frost biting his face, or the way his breath came out in white plumes. His mind was a storm far colder than the air around him. The board meeting he had just left wasn't merely frustrating. It had been a bloodbath of egos and finger-pointing 4 hours of wasted words, and an unrelenting reminder of how suffocating his so-called success had become. For a man who could buy anything he wanted, Liam felt like the poorest soul on earth that night, empty, restless, desperate to feel something. His leather shoes hit the slick pavement harder than they should have, his anger simmering to a boil. The streets of downtown were mostly deserted, save for a few taxis, and the distant echo of sirens. The neon lights of Fenway's bars and diners cast fractured glows across rain-slick sidewalks, reflections that made the world feel fractured too, like a cracked mirror reflecting a life he no longer recognized. Liam's hands were shoved deep into his coat pockets not for warmth, but to keep from doing something reckless, like punching a wall or breaking a window just to hear something shatter. That's when he saw it, a lone cardboard box sagging with moisture shoved against a trash bin on the corner of Boylston Street. Another piece of trash in a city that to him felt like it was rotting from the inside out. The sight shouldn't have meant anything, but something about it, its sheer unremarkable existence, became the target of every ounce of his pent-up frustration. Without a second thought, he swung his foot and kicked it hard, expecting the dull, hollow thud of empty paper or discarded cans. But the sound that came back wasn't hollow. It wasn't even inanimate. It was a muffled, breathy whimper so faint he almost thought he imagined it. Liam froze his breath, catching in his throat. The box went still silent, as if it hadn't made a sound at all. The street was empty eerily, so the only witness to this moment the glow of a nearby streetlight flickering like it was about to die. He crouched, pulse quickening, a strange mixture of fear and disbelief rising in his chest. It had to be a stray cat, he told himself. Or a rat. This was Boston, after all. But when the sound came again, softer this time, more like a weak sob than an animal's cry, his gut twisted. This wasn't a creature. It was a person. His hands, which moments ago had been curled into fists, were suddenly trembling as they reached for the folded cardboard flaps. No tape, no locks, just the faint resistance of soggy paper as he peeled it back. He expected maybe a drunk vagrant or someone looking for warmth. He was not prepared for what he saw. Inside, curled in a fetal position beneath a filthy, threadbare blanket, was a boy. No more than 6 years old, his small frame shaking violently even in unconsciousness. His dark hair was matted to his forehead, his lips tinged blue, and his little fists were clenched around nothing but air, as if he were fighting off the cold with sheer will. His breathing was shallow, every exhale a ghostly puff in the frigid air. For a moment Liam couldn't move. His mind, so used to boardrooms and spreadsheets, couldn't comprehend the reality before him. What was a child doing alone in a cardboard box on a night when even grown men sought shelter? The anger that had consumed him all evening evaporated, replaced by a thundering panic he'd never felt before. He reached out, hesitated, then placed his gloved hand gently against the boy's cheek. The skin was ice cold, the kind of cold that whispered of danger, of time running out. Liam's chest tightened, his heartbeat loud in his ears. He should call someone. The police, an ambulance, someone who actually knew what to do. But as the boy stirred his head, twitching slightly, his eyelids fluttering as though fighting to wake, Liam felt something crack inside him. There was no time to think, no time to weigh options or consequences. He scooped the boy up, shocked at how little he weighed, how his body felt more like a fragile bundle of bones and air than a child. He tore off his coat and wrapped it around the boy, holding him tight against his chest, feeling his faint shivers through the fabric. The world around him blurred the lights, the buildings, the sound of a distant honk. None of it mattered now. The only thing that mattered was getting this child somewhere safe, fast. His feet pounded the slick streets as he broke into a run, his breath burning in his lungs, his heart pounding as if trying to outrun death itself. 8 blocks. That was how far Massachusetts General Hospital was. Liam had passed it 1,000 times from the comfort of a chauffeured car, barely sparing it a thought. Now, every step toward it felt like dragging himself out of a nightmare he didn't understand but couldn't walk away from. Halfway there, the boy's eyes opened, deep brown, dazed and glistening in the glow of a passing streetlight. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He just looked up at Liam with an expression that wasn't fear, but something far heavier, an exhausted, wordless plea. Liam's throat tightened as he whispered, "You're safe. I've got you. I'm not letting you go." The boy's eyes fluttered shut again, his breathing shallow but steady against Liam's chest. And as the hospital's glowing red sign finally came into view, Liam Carter realized something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. This wasn't just about saving a boy from the cold. This night, this freezing, brutal night, was about to change everything he thought he knew about himself, about the life he lived, and about the emptiness he'd been trying so hard to ignore. Because for the first time in years, Liam Carter felt a spark of something real, a purpose raw and unshakable, blooming in the middle of that bitter Boston night. He didn't know what came next, but he knew this nothing in his world would ever be the same again. The streets of Manhattan had always felt like a blur to Liam Carter, background noise to his restless mind, a city that kept moving even when he wished it would stop. But that night, under the freezing December wind that sliced through his tailored coat, Manhattan wasn't just noise. It was heavy. The kind of heavy that presses into your bones, makes the air feel sharp, and every breath a punishment. He'd stormed out of a meeting he should have led a room full of voices, bickering over deals worth more than most people's lifetimes, but none of it mattered anymore. His pulse was still hammering in his ears, a migraine blooming like fire behind his eyes, as if his body was punishing him for another day of pretending he cared about numbers more than life itself. He wanted to destroy something, anything. And then he saw it, a small rain-soaked cardboard box slumped against an overflowing trash can. The kind of object the city swallowed every night without notice. A piece of litter forgotten, like so many other things. Liam's anger, sharp and untamed, found its target. He kicked it hard, so hard that the sound of his shoe meeting the box cracked through the icy air. For a split second, he felt a twisted sense of release. And then he froze. The sound that answered him wasn't the dull thud of garbage shifting. It was something softer, alive. A faint, broken whimper. Liam's blood ran cold, and for the first time in years, his heart stuttered in genuine panic. He crouched, his breath fogging in the bitter air, eyes locked on the box as if it were a bomb about to detonate. His fingers trembled as he pushed back the flaps, bracing himself for a rat, a stray cat, anything but what he actually found. Inside, curled tightly into himself, was a boy. No older than 6, maybe 5. His skin was pale lips, tinged blue, his small chest rising with shallow, fragile breaths. His dark hair was matted against his forehead, and his tiny hands clutched his arms, as though he could hold his shivering body together by sheer will. Liam's mind went blank. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The cold around him didn't just sting anymore. It sank into his bones, into his soul, because in that moment, everything he thought he knew about the world cracked apart. What if I hadn't kicked the box? What if I'd just walked by? His thoughts spiraled so fast they became static. He pressed his hand gently to the boy's face. His skin was ice. Not just cold, but deathly, terrifyingly cold. The kind of cold that whispered of stillness, of silence that doesn't end. And for the first time in his meticulously controlled life, Liam Carter didn't think about the rules, or the consequences, or even the rational thing to do, which would have been to call for help and wait. His instincts, raw and primal, shoved everything aside. He scooped the boy into his arms, shocked at how weightless he was, like holding a ghost. The boy stirred just barely, a flicker of movement against Liam's chest. That single twitch lit a fire under his ribs. His legs started moving before his brain could catch up. He was running, really running, not the kind of disciplined, measured jog he did at his gym, but a frantic, chaotic sprint. His lungs burned with the cold air. Each breath tore at his throat. His polished shoes slipped on slick patches of sidewalk, but he didn't stop. The streets became a smear of lights and shadows. His entire world narrowed to the fragile weight in his arms. Please, not here. Not now. Not like this. The words looped in his head, desperate, frantic. Every car horn was a gunshot. Every passing second a countdown he couldn't see, but felt clawing at his back. He'd passed the hospital 1,000 times, always sealed behind tinted windows of a chauffeured car. Tonight, 8 blocks felt like a marathon through purgatory. Halfway there, the boy's eyelids fluttered open. His eyes, wide and dark, met Liam's with a confusion so pure it stabbed through the panic. No fear, no questions, just a silent, searching stare, as if trying to understand why this stranger was holding him, why the world had suddenly shifted again. "It's okay," Liam gasped, his voice breaking, though he didn't know if it was true. "I've got you, I've got you." By the time the hospital's neon sign cut through the night like a lifeline, Liam's legs were numb. He burst through the doors shouting for help, his voice ragged and raw. Nurses and doctors swarmed, pulling the boy from his arms and onto a stretcher. Oxygen mask, machines, numbers. Words Liam couldn't process. His arms hung in the air, still curled as though holding the boy, his whole body shaking, not from the cold, but from the terror that had clawed through him. He stood in the hallway as the doors shut, the sound of beeping monitors muffled behind glass. His heart was still racing, every beat a thunderclap in his skull. But worse than the adrenaline was the image that refused to leave his mind, a rain-soaked box. A boy so still he might not wake. And the horrifying truth that if Liam had walked by, if he had been the man he was 10 minutes earlier, that boy might have died alone in the dark. And he couldn't stop replaying it. Over and over, the kick, the whimper, the sight of those tiny lips blue from the cold. Each replay stabbed him with a sharper guilt. He had wanted to vent his anger on the world, and instead he had stumbled on something that would haunt him, the thought that for one fleeting moment he almost didn't care. Standing in that sterile hallway surrounded by strangers in scrubs, Liam Carter realized something that left him even more unsteady than the sprint or the cold. He wasn't panicking because of what had happened. He was panicking because for the first time in his life he desperately needed that little boy to live. Not for redemption, not to quiet the guilt clawing at his insides, but because something deep inside him, something he hadn't felt in years, screamed that this life, this small, fragile, shivering life, mattered more than his own. The first few mornings with Ethan in his apartment were unlike anything Liam Carter had ever experienced. The silence he once cherished, the kind that made his luxury penthouse feel like a fortress. From the chaos below was now fractured by small sounds that felt like tremors in his perfectly controlled world. The shuffle of tiny feet on the hardwood floors. the tentative creak of a cabinet opening in the kitchen, the soft voice that would call his name when he was still tangled in sheets, exhausted from nights spent thinking instead of sleeping. Liam. I'm hungry. It wasn't demanding, just matter of fact, as if Ethan had learned long ago not to expect more than a basic response from the world. Liam would drag himself out of bed, usually long before the sun had cut through the city skyline, feeling more unprepared than he had ever felt in a boardroom or negotiation. He had built empires closed deals worth billions, yet staring into a near-empty fridge and a child looking up at him with cautious expectation made him feel utterly helpless. The first morning there had been nothing but bottled water, a bottle of wine, and a takeout container of something that smelled faintly of soy and regret. Ethan simply shrugged as though this absence of food was no surprise. But it lit something in Liam, a discomfort not at the lack itself, but at how easily Ethan accepted it. Acceptance didn't belong in a 6-year-old's vocabulary, not like that. So he took Ethan with him to the grocery store, an experience so far removed from Liam's routine it felt like visiting another planet. The aisles stretched endlessly, bursting with options he had never considered, foods he had never touched, because someone else always filled his kitchen. Ethan, wide-eyed and clutching the handle of the cart, didn't ask for anything, not even when his gaze lingered on bright boxes of cereal and shelves stacked with candy. "What do you like?" Liam asked more than once, but the boy's answer was always the same. "Whatever there is." The quiet resignation in his voice gnawed at Liam. He knelt down to meet Ethan's eyes, steady and serious, despite his age. "No, not whatever. Tell me what you want." After a pause, Ethan pointed to a box with a cartoon tiger on it. His choice felt symbolic to Liam, small, innocent, but deliberate. For the first time, someone was asking Ethan what he wanted, not what he could settle for. That first breakfast they made together was clumsy. Liam, a man whose mornings usually began with black coffee and conference calls, fumbled with the milk, spilling half of it on the marble counter. He cursed under his breath, and immediately caught himself glancing at Ethan, who for the first time gave a soft laugh, a real, unguarded sound. It was just a few notes of a laugh, but it pierced through the stiffness between them like sunlight through clouds. "You're not very good at this," Ethan teased, gently holding the milk carton with both hands to show him how to pour it without spilling. Liam, a man accustomed to commanding rooms, found himself humbly learning from a 6-year-old how to make cereal. Their days took on a rhythm that felt foreign, but strangely grounding. They visited shops to buy Ethan proper clothes, watching his face light up when he saw a small navy blue sweater that actually fit instead of hanging from his thin frame like a costume. They spent afternoons in Central Park, where Ethan clutched Liam's hand at first, but over time loosened his grip enough to run through the grass, testing the edges of safety. Liam found himself looking away from his phone, more often actually watching as the boy climbed low branches or chased after pigeons. He didn't realize how much his world had been starved of color until he saw Ethan laughing dirt on his sneakers, cheeks flushed pink from the cold. But the real lessons came quietly in the unplanned moments. At night, when Ethan hesitated before crawling into the bed Liam had prepared for him, Liam noticed him slowly lowering himself to the carpet, curling up with the blanket like he had in the hospital. It wasn't fear of the bed. It was that the bed felt temporary, too good to be trusted. Liam crouched beside him, his chest aching at the sight. "The bed's yours, Ethan. It's not going anywhere. Neither am I." He didn't force him to move. Instead, he took an extra blanket, tucked it around him, and stayed there until the boy drifted off. That night, Liam lay awake, realizing the depth of what he was up against, not just hunger or cold, but a child's bone-deep belief that good things were fleeting. Each day, Liam stumbled through the process of learning to be something he had never imagined: a guardian, A father figure, whatever title might explain why Ethan began to shadow him from room to room. It wasn't dependence born of fear, it was quiet anchoring. Wherever Liam was answering calls, reading reports, making dinner with the help of YouTube videos, Ethan was nearby watching, sometimes mimicking. He became a constant presence, one that Liam didn't just tolerate but grew to rely on. The apartment, once sterile and echoing, began to feel alive in ways Liam hadn't thought possible. The hardest conversations were the ones Ethan initiated, always with a directness that made Liam's chest tighten. One evening, while Liam was clumsily assembling pasta with sauce from a jar, Ethan asked, "Why are you taking care of me?" The question came without fear, just genuine curiosity, but it sent Liam into a rare silence. Why? At first, it had been instinct, then obligation. Now, something else. Because you make me feel like I matter? Liam finally admitted, surprising himself as much as Ethan. The boy tilted his head as if studying him. Didn't you matter? Before Liam shook his head. I thought I did, but it was different. Now it feels real. Ethan, with a wisdom far beyond his years, nodded slowly. You make me feel real too. That night, when Ethan finally chose to sleep in the bed rather than the floor, Liam stood in the doorway longer than he needed to. Watching the boy's chest rise and fall, the soft rhythm of his breathing, Liam realized he had crossed a line he couldn't retreat from. Ethan was no longer just a responsibility, no longer a temporary fixture until the system decided his fate. He was something more, someone who needed Liam as much as Liam needed him. And though Liam had built his life on logic and control, he felt no fear in that realization. Only a deep, grounding certainty that for the first time he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Liam Carter had always lived in a world where problems were solvable, where money connections and determination could bend reality to his will. But as he sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, watching 5-year-old Mason sleep in the next room, he realized this was different. The boy's soft breaths were steady now, his small hand clutching the corner of a blanket like it was a lifeline. Liam had given him warmth, food safety things Mason hadn't known in far too long. But one question haunted Liam's thoughts, unrelenting and cold as the December wind that had first brought Mason into his life. Where was Rachel? Mason's mother was more than a missing person. She was the gaping hole in the boy's fragile sense of security, the unanswered question in every glance Mason gave him when the room went quiet. Liam hadn't asked at first, fearing the wound was too fresh, but Mason would sometimes whisper her name in his sleep, a sound that cut through Liam's chest like a blade. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The boy deserved answers, even if those answers hurt. The morning after another restless night, Liam picked up the phone and called the only person he knew could handle something like this, Jack Morris, a former detective turned private investigator. Jack had worked for Liam before discreetly digging into the backgrounds of business partners and competitors, but this was no corporate investigation. When Jack's voice came on the line, rough and skeptical, as always, Liam hesitated for the first time. Jack, I need to find someone, a woman. Her name is Rachel Hayes. She's Mason's mother. I don't have much to go on, but I need to know what happened to her. Jack didn't ask for details at first, just exhaled slowly, as though weighing the weight of the request. You're sure about this, Carter people on the streets? Sometimes the trail leads to places you don't want to see. I'm sure, Liam, said his voice firmer than he felt. But I need to know. He needs to know. Over the next few days, Liam tried to keep Mason's world as normal as possible, if normal could even exist for a boy who had slept in a cardboard box weeks ago. They went to the park near the Charles River, where Mason fed the ducks, and laughed the kind of sound that made Liam forget briefly how fragile everything was. They spent evenings building Lego towers that scraped toward the ceiling, Mason's focus so intense that Liam would catch himself just watching, realizing he hadn't truly watched another human being in years. But every time Mason's laughter faded, every time his little brow furrowed in thought, Liam knew who was in his mind. Rachel wasn't just a missing person. She was the missing anchor in this boy's life. Jack's updates came in fragments never fast enough. He tracked Rachel through shelters, hospitals, the patchwork network of outreach programs that most people like Liam never even knew existed. She had been seen weeks ago at a church-run soup kitchen in Cambridge. Before that, a winter shelter in Somerville. Then nothing. Each time Jack called, Liam felt his chest tighten, afraid that the next words would confirm his darkest fear, that Rachel wasn't alive to be found. Late one evening, after putting Mason to bed, Liam sat at his kitchen table, with a legal pad scribbling notes from every lead Jack had mentioned. Street names, shelters, vague sightings, fragments of a life lived on the edge of survival. It struck him how absurdly fragile the line between being visible and invisible was in this city. For people like him, the world bent to make them seen. For people like Rachel, it seemed designed to erase them. Finally, Jack's voice on the phone broke the limbo I found her Carter. Liam gripped the edge of the counter. "Is she—" "She's alive," Jack said, and Liam felt a breath leave him he didn't know he'd been holding. But it's complicated. The night Mason ended up in that box, Rachel collapsed on a street near Dorchester. Severe hypothermia, dehydration, malnutrition, she almost didn't make it. She's been in a rehabilitation center in Brooklyn for the last few weeks. Stable, but weak. She's been asking about her son every day. The relief was almost dizzying, but so was the weight of what came next. Rachel hadn't abandoned Mason, not by choice. She had been fighting for her life while her son shivered alone in a cardboard shelter. Liam closed his eyes, trying to imagine what it must have felt like for Rachel, delirious and helpless, and for Mason waiting and wondering if his mother had simply walked away. He knew what he had to do, even if it made his chest ache at the thought. He would tell Mason the truth. The boy deserved to know his mother hadn't left him, that she had fought, that she still loved him. But he also knew what this meant for himself. Mason might not stay. The boy who had slowly, quietly become the center of Liam's once empty world might return to his rightful one, with the woman who had brought him into it. That night, Liam sat on the edge of Mason's bed, the glow of the city casting soft shadows on the boy's peaceful face. When Mason stirred awake, blinking up at him, Liam felt his voice catch for a moment. "Hey, buddy, I found your mom." Mason sat up instantly, his eyes wide. "Rachel, you found her." "She's alive," Liam said softly. "She got really sick that night, Mason. She couldn't come back because her body gave out. But she's better now. She's been looking for you every day since she got strong enough to walk." For a moment, Mason didn't speak. His lip trembled, his fingers tightening around the blanket. "She didn't leave me." "No," Liam said, his voice firm but gentle. "She didn't leave you, not on purpose. She's been trying to find you this whole time." Tears welled in Mason's eyes, but they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of release, as if the heavy stone on his small shoulders had finally been lifted. Can I see her?" Liam nodded, his throat tight. "Of course. When you're ready." As Mason wrapped his arms around him, whispering, "Thank you." Liam felt the sting of two emotions battling in his chest. Relief that the boy he'd grown to care for would soon be reunited with his mother, and a quiet, selfish fear of what it would feel like when that reunion meant letting go. The morning Mason was finally set to see Rachel, the entire apartment felt different. It wasn't just the soft rustle of his small feet pacing the hallway or the way he clutched the sleeve of his favorite blue sweatshirt. It was the weight of anticipation hanging in the air like a storm about to break. Liam watched him from the doorway, noticing the way his hands fidgeted, his eyes darting toward the window, as though each passing car might bring a sign of what was to come. He looked so small, yet there was a quiet determination in the set of his jaw. This was the day Mason would find out if his world was whole again, and Liam couldn't shake the gnawing ache in his chest, wondering if this was also the day he would have to let go. The ride to the rehabilitation center in Brooklyn was silent, except for the soft hum of the cab and the occasional intake of breath from Mason as he stared out the window. Liam wanted to speak to offer reassurance, but what could he say? He knew this wasn't just a meeting. It was the collision of two broken worlds trying to find each other again. And beneath his calm exterior, he wrestled with the thought he didn't dare voice what would happen when Rachel was ready to take Mason home. Would the boy who had become the heartbeat of Liam's life still have a place in it? When they arrived, a social worker named Linda guided them through the hushed corridors. Mason's hand clung tightly to Liam's, his small fingers cold despite the warmth of the building. At the end of a hallway marked with the number 23, Linda paused and glanced at Mason with a reassuring smile. "She's been waiting for you," she said softly, opening the door. Rachel was sitting on a narrow bed, her frame thinner than Liam had imagined, her brown hair pulled back loosely, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the edge of the blanket. But when her eyes met Mason's, everything else, the frailty, the weight of her recovery, seemed to disappear. The world shrank to just the two of them. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Mason, my baby." For a heartbeat, Mason stood frozen, staring at the woman who had haunted his dreams and filled his questions for weeks. "You didn't leave me." His voice cracked, carrying both hope and fear. Rachel's face crumpled as tears filled her eyes. "Never," she whispered, her arms outstretched. "I tried to come back. I fought to, but I was too sick. I've been looking for you every day since I could stand." That was all Mason needed. He bolted forward, flinging himself into her arms, and she clutched him so tightly it seemed like she'd never let go. Their sobs filled the small room, raw and unfiltered, the sound of two people rediscovering a bond neither time nor tragedy could sever. Liam stood near the door, his throat tight, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets to keep from reaching for something to hold. He felt the sting of loss, but also the undeniable warmth of witnessing something profoundly right. For the next hour, Mason clung to Rachel as she stroked his hair and kissed his forehead over and over, whispering apologies, promises, and fragments of lullabies that had once been their comfort. She asked him about the days apart, listened as he haltingly told her about Liam, about the apartment overlooking Boston Common, about the cereal and the Legos, and the nights when he'd woken from bad dreams to find Liam sitting beside him. Each time Mason mentioned Liam, Rachel's eyes found his gratitude shining through her tears. "You took care of him," she said softly, not as a question but as a truth. "I can never thank you enough." Liam shook his head. "He took care of me too." Over the next week, Liam worked quietly behind the scenes to make sure Rachel and Mason would have a life beyond survival. He found a modest but safe apartment for them in Queens, close to a good school and a park where Mason could run and play. He arranged for the first few months' rent, stocked the fridge, even bought Mason a sturdy little bike he could ride along the tree-lined streets. He told himself it was for Mason's sake alone, but deep down he knew it was also his way of holding on, of ensuring a thread of connection, even as their daily lives diverged. On the day Rachel and Mason moved into their new home, the air was alive with a strange mix of celebration and quiet heartbreak. Mason darted from room to room, his laughter echoing off the freshly painted walls, as Rachel watched with tears in her eyes, still frail, but filled with a determination that hadn't been there before. When Liam handed her the keys, she hesitated, her fingers brushing his. "You didn't have to do any of this," she murmured. "I did. he replied, his voice steady despite the heaviness in his chest. "Because he deserves it, and so do you." As the sun dipped below the rooftops, Liam knelt in the living room, where Mason was assembling a tower of toy blocks. "Hey, champ," he said softly. "I'll be back to visit, okay, whenever you want. You and your mom you're still my family." Mason looked up at him, his eyes wide and unguarded. "Always. Always." Liam set his throat tight as Mason threw his arms around his neck. No matter what. In the weeks that followed, Liam found himself visiting. Often, sometimes helping Rachel with errands, sometimes just sitting on the floor with Mason as they pieced together puzzles, or raced toy cars across the kitchen tiles. But something else began to grow from those visits, an idea that came one quiet evening as Mason looked up from a puzzle and asked Liam, "Are there other kids like me, kids who don't have homes?" The question stayed with him echoing long after he left that night. With Rachel's insight into the struggles families faced and Liam's resources, they began to dream bigger. Within months, they had opened a program in Brooklyn, offering transitional apartments for families, childcare, and job training for parents, an initiative Mason proudly named Bridges Without Locks, because, as he explained, every door should open for kids like me. On the day the center opened, Mason handed Liam a crayon, drawing a building with wide-open doors, and dozens of smiling faces with the words written shakily at the bottom. "This is what family looks like." Liam taped it to the wall of his office at the center, a constant reminder that the family he'd stumbled upon on that freezing night in Boston had given him more than he ever thought possible. Mason had found his mother, Rachel had found her strength, and Liam had found a life richer than any fortune he'd ever earned. And though their paths had changed, their bond remained unbreakable, not bound by blood, but by something stronger, choice care, and a love that refused to let anyone slip through the cracks again. In the end, Liam Harrington's life became a story he could never have scripted, a journey that began with a bitter, restless night on the streets of Boston, and a single unthinking kick at a rain-soaked cardboard box. Inside that box, he didn't just find a shivering 5-year-old boy named Mason. He found a turning point, a purpose and a reason to finally look beyond his wealth, his glass-walled penthouse, and his carefully controlled life. What began as a split-second decision to pick up a fragile, half-frozen child instead of walking away became the choice that unraveled everything Liam thought he knew about himself and stitched together something far greater. A new kind of family built not from blood, but from connection and love. The weeks that followed that freezing night revealed who Liam truly was beneath the title of billionaire. For years, he had measured his worth in contracts, investments, and numbers that could fill endless columns on spreadsheets, but caring for Mason shattered that shallow scale. Late nights spent watching over the boy as he trembled through bad dreams, mornings spent learning how to pour milk into a cereal bowl without making a mess, afternoons exploring the city not for business, but to show a child the simple joy of choosing his first toy or a warm coat, all of it chipped away at the walls Liam had built around himself. And as Mason began to heal, finding safety and comfort in Liam's once sterile apartment, Liam too began to heal from a different kind of emptiness, the kind money could never fill. When they finally discovered Rachel Mason's mother, frail but alive, her love for her son stronger than the storm that had separated them, Liam faced the hardest truth of all. To love Mason fully meant to do what was right even when it hurt. It meant helping Rachel regain her footing, not as a handout, but as a foundation, so Mason could have his mother back and Rachel could have her life back. For Liam, it meant stepping back not as someone cast aside, but as someone who had played a crucial role in bridging two broken hearts back together. Yet, what could have been an ending became a beginning. Mason still visited every week. Rachel became a trusted friend. and together they turned their shared pain into something far larger, a lifeline for other families through the program they built, bridges without locks, ensuring no child would ever again feel trapped, cold, and forgotten behind closed doors. This story carries a lesson far beyond the lives of Liam Mason and Rachel. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound changes come not from grand plans or long-term visions, but from a single choice, in a fleeting moment, the choice to stop, to listen, to care, even when the world tells us to keep walking. We live in a time where it's easy to retreat into our own struggles, to measure success in material terms, and to forget that the smallest act of compassion can ripple outward to change more lives than we ever imagined. Liam's transformation shows that fulfillment doesn't come from the size of your bank account, the prestige of your job, or the comfort of your life. It comes from the connections you forge, the people you choose to stand beside, and the lives you touch when you decide to give a piece of yourself. Mason's resilience reminds us that even in the bleakest circumstances, hope can survive when someone simply chooses to show up. And Rachel's fight to return to her son reminds us that love, no matter how fragile, can outlast even the darkest winters when there's someone willing to help it find the light again. As you take this story with you, ask yourself, who in your world could use a hand, a listening ear, or a moment of your time? What doors could you open, even in small ways, to remind someone they're not alone? We may not all have Liam's wealth, but we each have the power to change a life, sometimes by doing nothing more than choosing to care. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss the next story that just might inspire you to see the world and your place in it a little differently. Your support helps us keep bringing you more powerful, heartfelt stories, like this one. Stories that remind us all of what truly matters. Together, let's keep the light of compassion alive, one story at a time.